and they also helped us out on our field expeditions. We had a team of AFAR working in our camp, providing us with food, so it was an extremely nice relationship working with them. But the reason that people go there is because of these exposures, and specifically the kinds of fossils that you might find there. These are Pliocene fossils that date anywhere from a little more than 2.5 million years ago all the way back beyond research expedition. And they went out here looking for specifically hominin fossils. And what they came up with right off the bat, 1973, was this. How many of you have seen this fossil? Cool. That is a knee joint discovered by paleoanthropologist Donald Johansen in 1973 in the Hadar region. And what was interesting, this was this part is the femur, this is the tibia, this is the knee right here. And the fossil dates to about 3.5 million years old. And because of the orientation of the tibia to the femur, it was apparent to the scientists, including Don Johansen, that this was from an upright walking organism, walking pretty much the same way you and I do. Because if you look at apes versus humans, their skeletons are different, particularly around the knee joint. So if you look at a human knee, you can see the femur comes in and meets at an angle with the tibia, whereas if you have an ape knee, the femur pretty much joins with the tibia in almost a straight line. So the fact that this early knee from Hadar at 3.4 million years already had that angle built in indicated to these scientists that this was an upright walking bipedal organism, which was very cool. At the time, it was the earliest known evidence of upright bipedality anywhere in the fossil record. So it was an extremely important find. What would you do with this find? You just made this discovery. What would you do?
I'd call somebody.
Well, no, they're out there on a permit. So what else would you do?
Look more. Grab it.
Before you look for more, what do you do?
Grab it. Protect it.
After that.
Grab it.
The mid part you're missing is write a grant. That's exactly what they did. They wrote a grant. They said, we just found the earliest ever evidence of upright walking hominins. If you give us more money, we'll go back out there and find more. So, and again, look at this stuff. Isn't this just killing you? Oh, it's just gorgeous. I took this picture standing on a little rise. And if I turned around and took this picture, it's kind of interesting because right there, that little knob is where in 1974, Johansen and his team discovered a skeleton that you might have heard of called Lucy. How many of you have heard of Lucy? Okay. And this is them working in the field in 1974. This is Lucy's skeleton right here. And this is how she ended up. So imagine you go out there, you get the money, you go out there, and you find a knee joint that pushes back the earliest evidence of upright walking hominins. And so you get some more money, you go out the next year, and they find what at the time was one of the most complete skeletons ever discovered from the same region. About 20% complete, and if you leave out the hand and foot bones, it's going to be closer to 40% complete. So if you've read the book Lucy, The Beginnings of Humankind, and they say Lucy was about 40% complete, that's because they weren't counting the hand and wrist bones. But she's still 20% complete, which is hugely complete. And at the time was the most complete skeleton of a single individual hominin ever discovered. I say she because it actually preserved part of the pelvis. So they were able to determine that this was a female organism. And because you still had another knee joint as well as the hip, you were able to demonstrate that here too, you had an upright walking hominin. And this kind of answered a long-standing discussion among paleoanthropologists. What are the things that led to us being us? And back in the old days of paleoanthropology, the discussion was, well, it was our brain size, or it was our tool use, or something. Now the thinking is the real first step, so to speak, to being human was being upright and walking the way we walk now. Because Lucy had a small skull and very ape-like features and a very, very small brain. And yet she was walking upright the same way you and I. The fossils went to the Cleveland Museum of Natural History, where they still have a cast of her on display, because that's where Johansen was at the time. So that's where the announcement of this amazing discovery was made. Her name, Lucy, by the way, comes from when they found this. They were so happy, they were partying, having a great time, and apparently their tape deck was playing Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, the Phoenix song, over and over and So that's how Lucy got her name. And this is where, again, at Cleveland, you can see this cast of the original discovery. She was important because she was a partial skeleton, but you can see there's a whole bunch of the skull that's missing. These bits here are the actual bone that was found. Most of her skull was missing, but they have since found other representatives of this species to fill out the description of it. What do you do when you find a partial skeleton? Write a grant. You write a grant, and you go back out the next year, absolutely. And so it was the next year, 1975, that's 3 years in a row. How many of you have heard of Louis Leakey? How long did he work? He and Mary Leakey, excuse me, how long did both of them work in Ouldaney Gorge before they found their first ever hominin? 40 years. Knee joint first year, Lucy second year. What do you think they're going to find the third year? What do you think they're going to find right there on that knob the third year? That's right. They're going to find a collection of multiple individuals, what they eventually nicknamed the first family. They found males, they found females, they found adults, they found juveniles, they found infants, they found all sorts of different things. So they called it the first family. With multiple individuals, a minimum of 13 individuals represented in the sample. This is unheard of. So when I showed you those pictures of the fossils sitting at the surface, that's really cool, but at the same time, to find hominin fossils in that profusion was at the time unheard of, and I believe since then, it's still unheard of. You don't go places and find this many hominins. Even more recent assemblages don't have that wealth, so it's just a staggeringly important site. That's just a little bit of the first family. Imagine having that kind of a sample to work with. That's just amazing. So, of course, at this point, if you can't name a new species, there's something seriously deficient with you. So they decided in 1978 to name a new species, Australopithecus afarensis. The translation is the southern ape from Africa. And again, it was considered to be more primitive. Hi. Come on in. I told you I was going to have to start over, right? So, again, small body, highly sexually dimorphic. So the males were very big relative to the females. And small brains, ape-like features, but upright bipedality. So it seemed to be a unique organism. And in fact, they placed it. Here's the line leading to Australopithecines. Here's the line leading to Homo habilis, Homo erectus, and Homo sapiens. And they placed it right at the base. So afarensis was seen, and this is in 1981 is when that diagram was published. It's seen as the branching point, where on one hand you have everything leading to us, and on the other hand you have everything leading to all those Australopithecine and Paranthropine lineages that eventually were going to go extinct. And so Lucy becomes the pivot right there. Lucy, however, caught on as kind of a pop phenomenon, and it's still well respected and well known. I mean, all of you have heard about Lucy, right? Except for maybe some of the young ones over there, but just about everybody else raised your hands. And it's not just you because you're here in a museum or a member of a paleontological society. I mean, here's if you don't know who Lucy is, you don't get it. Right? And yet everybody got it. Now, I should mention that in Ethiopia, they don't call her Lucy. They call her Dinkinesh, which means you are marvelous. But you can actually go to bars in Ethiopia, and they have posters of Lucy hanging up. I was trying to shorten my talk, so I took it out. They also had posters of Jennifer Lopez, so, you know. But she did catch on, and she's still popular even today, many decades after her discovery. However, this chart has changed markedly because since the late 1970s, early 1980s, there have been any number of additional discoveries. And so the early hominin tree has become a lot more complicated. And I don't want to get into it because that's the sort of thing that leads to all sorts of issues, because virtually every paleoanthropologist out there will have a slightly different take on which of these are valid, which are not valid, which are ancestral to us, which are not ancestral to us. But what I do want to emphasize here is that there's a big gap right there between Lucy and between everything above it. Above this line is the genus Homo, the genus to which we belong. And below that are the Australopithecines, and there's Lucy right there. So you'll notice there's a gap between Lucy, which is supposed to be the pivot, with everything else going to one side and Homo on this side, there's a gap there that hasn't been filled. So there's Lucy staring at us, and how do we make that connection? How do we look for something between us and Lucy and actually test the hypothesis that she is the connection, that she is the pivot point between the early Australopithecines and all of the other organisms that led to us versus all of the other organisms that are off to the side and may have looked hominin-like but weren't actually ancestral to us. And that brings me to this region. This is just to the northeast of Hadar, and in some cases the Hadar Formation is exposed here. But this is an area called Lady Gararu, L-E-D-I-Gararu. And this is where you can find it here. So here's Hadar down here, the Awash River, and there's where the Lady Gararu Research Project is located. This was actually examined by John Call, the geologist, way back in the International FR Research Expedition. He looked here and noted that the geology was amazingly complicated. And he would have loved to get back in there and figure it out, except that Johansen and company started finding hominins down in Hadar, so that's where all of the focus and all of the money went, which is perfectly justifiable. That's not any kind of criticism. You go where the fossils are. The fossils were more thin on the ground in Lady Gararu than they were in Hadar, and so that's where they went to look for this stuff. Here's Hadar down here, here's Lady Gararu up there, so it gives you, again, some idea of the where the sites are located. And if you actually zero in on Lady Gararu and you look at this area here, these red lines are mapped faults. And so you can see there's an awful lot of faulting going on in this region, which is what John Call noticed when he first went there. And what I want you to notice is the orientation of the faults in the Lady Gararu area. These big faults here are trending along the East African Rift. These are actually trending along there, the same direction as the Red Sea opening, which means the faults in the Lady Gararu area are in part the result of the Arabian plate pulling to the north and northeast, rather than just the East African Rift separately. So that's pretty cool. And that's one of the things that John Call probably threw a curve at him when he said, wow, the geology here is really complicated. You've got multiple different things going on in one region at the same time. If you break it out still further, the different sand or sediment packages in this area have been broken out by different names. The Bulanan dates to about 2.84 million years. The Garumaha, I love these names. The Garumaha dates to around 2.82 million years. The Leodoita dates to around 2.67 million years. And the golden sands of the Garsalu are younger than 2.58 million years. So the geologists have done their homework. This has all been published in Science, so you can read up on this if you want to. This is a hill. I've been doing this forever, you guys. I'm good at this. Specifically, it's called Hominin Hill, or abbreviated to Hom Hill. And it's called that, see if you can guess why. It's because this gentleman, whose name is Chalachusium from Arizona State University, he was a graduate student at the time, and he has extraordinarily good eyes and extraordinarily bad taste in baseball teams. But good eyes because he discovered this jaw. That is a hominin jaw. Yeah, isn't that cool? And that's pretty much what it looked like when he found it. And he found it in the Lady Gararu area. This is from the publication in Science. It was a wonderful jaw, even though it's fragmentary. Nevertheless, it preserves a number of features. It has several primitive features, particularly with the front end of the jaw. It's angled forward. From the bottom of the chin, it doesn't have a chin, but from the bottom of the jaw up, it angles forward. That's an Australopithecine trait. It's got a very pronounced bulbous front end. Not a chin, but it does have a very pronounced bulbous front end of the jaw. That's an Australopithecine trait. And the infraorbital torus, what it's called, this bit right here, is elevated just very slightly above the base of the jaw, which is also an Australopithecine character. So you're looking at a jaw that has some Australopithecine characteristics. But this part of the jaw on the inside is convex rather than concave. That is a Homo feature. We have that. Other early Homo has this. this foramen is opening towards the back end of the jaw. It's not opening straight out, and it's not opening pointing up. If it was opening straight out or pointing up, it would be Australopithecine. Opening towards the back, that's a Homo trait that we also share. And this is the ascending ramus, the big hinge part of the jaw, and it leaves the horizontal ramus right there next to the third molar. If this was an Australopithecine, it would do it here next to the second molar. So you've got this combination of Australopithecine primitive traits and more derived Homo traits that are consistent with all early Homo that we know of, as well as ourselves today. And so with that combination of traits, it was determined to be an early Homo. Now this is Palm Hill right here. There's the ash, the Garumaha tuff, and then right there is where they found this lower jaw, at the top of this hill. The Garumaha tuff dates to around 2.82 million years old. This jaw is stratigraphically above the Garumaha tuff. So that leaves you with the earliest record of Homo yet known at 2.8 million years. This is the first earliest record of Homo. Not complete enough to be assigned to species. Nevertheless, this is the earliest by far. It fills that gap right there, the gap that I showed you between Lucy and the rest of the early Homo. It's right there where you want it to be. It fills in that gap. So now we actually have a connection between Lucy and her ilk and humans and our ilk. So, if you were to look at this, there's Lucy down there in Australopithecus afarensis. Johansen and White and their colleagues proposed Lucy as that pivot point way back in the late 1970s, early 1980s. This is how they envisioned it working, would be from afarensis to early Homo, and then all of these other things would be peripheral. They'd be on the side. Now, other scientists argue that. I'm one of them. Now, granted, when Johansen and White proposed this, I was a graduate student, so my arguments don't mean anything. Nevertheless, at the time, I thought it might go something like this, from something like Lucy to something like Australopithecus africanus. Maybe not actually Africanus, because that's a South African form, but still probably something like that, and I assumed that they would find that in East Africa, some representative of that, and then that would lead to Homo. It just seemed to me, in my complete ignorance of these things, to be too big a jump from something like Lucy to something like early Homo. I'm not alone in having challenges with that. There were also suggestions that a South African form, Australopithecus sediba, which looks like that, might also have been ancestral. The timing on that is a little wonky because the Australopithecus sediba from South Africa is there even after we have what are thought to be some early species of Homo. Nevertheless, that hypothesis has been published as well. But if you put your jaw from Lady Gerardo right there, none of the rest of that works. And it turns out Johansen and company were correct right from the get-go. That this is Homo, and it seems to be, based on the anatomical characters, that you're going straight from Lucy through this early Homo to the rest of it. All of these other Australopithecines and Paranthropines have to be on a side branch. Does that make sense to you? It makes sense to me. So even though this area, these are more pictures of what the fossils are like, again, nothing posed. I found that it's another hippo, and it's just sitting there at the surface. And the wealth of this region was known, but it was the hominins being discovered there that actually led to the amount of money, the amount of time, the amount of effort to go there and look for these fossils. That being said, once you found the fossil, okay, now we have the earliest Homo that we know of. Number one, you'd probably like to find some more, write another grant. Number two, you want to find out what's the environment like, what other organisms are there, what was this creature living with, what was going on. And so that's the purview of this person. This is Kay Reed from Arizona State University in Phoenix. And she's the lead paleontologist on the Lady Gerardo project. There are also paleoanthropologists, there are archaeologists, there are geologists, but in terms of the actual paleontology, Kay is the lead. And her focus is not just on the animals, but specifically how they apply. These are some of her books that actually discuss early hominin paleontology and the environment as deduced from not just the geology, but also the organisms that are found. So here's Kay leading us out for the day with her team, just hiking out into the Badlands, which are gorgeous. Can I say again? If I start drooling, but I mean, look at that. We got to climb that whole hill. It was just wonderful. I would go back today if they would let me. And it just goes on and on and on and on and on. And it's just fossils sitting at the surface. That's a hippo femur, again, just sitting at the surface. Now, I gotta tell you, I went out there, and Kay's been out there before, and a lot of the students have been out there before, and they all looked at me kind of bemused, because I keep, taking pictures of everything. And they're just, Eric, that stuff's everywhere. You know that, right? You're gonna run out of picture space if you keep taking these pictures. And they were right, I did. I ran out of storage space, but I brought multiple sticks. So anyway, lots of pictures. That's another hippo. That's a hippo vertebra, also at the surface. Yes, sir?
Are these hippos back in that age bigger, smaller?
These are actually dwarf hippos. Very good question. These are dwarf hippos, and they weren't quite so waterlogged as living hippos are, because a lot of the rest of the environment doesn't suggest that it was deeply aquatic. But we still find a lot of these things here. So much so, I should mention that the fossils we're discovering do not leave Ethiopia. So I can't break some out and show them to you here. The fossils stay in Ethiopia at the National Museum, and the National Museum in Ethiopia has only so much space. And so this hippo, and the last one I showed you, and the one before that, and the one before that, they're still there in the field, because hippo bones are big. And so if you collect all of the hippos, you swallow all of the available storage space, and you've got nothing left for anything else. So you documented it, you recorded it. In some cases, you took a picture of it, and then you set it down and you kept moving. In fact, Kay was very clear. I do not want to see any hippos on my table unless they were really, really significant. Like this. This is a lower jaw of a hippo. There are the teeth. These are the ascending rami of the lower jaw sticking up out of the ground. So some of the stuff can be a little buried. It's not all just sitting at the surface, but still, it's an amazingly rich deposit. There's Josh Robinson with a hippo jaw that he just found. This one we actually did collect. We also find a lot of bovids, which you'd expect if you're working in East Africa. Africa is bovid central, the cloven-footed things like wildebeest. This is actually what's left of the horn of a wildebeest from 2.8 million years ago. That is a pig jaw, what's left of it. Here's the front end, there's the back end, there's the cheek teeth in the middle of it. I actually took this picture, when I first found it, I thought horse jaw. And I'm waiting to take a picture of myself next to the horse jaw. And so I'm all set. And then I look at it, no, it's a pig. One of the students, a gentleman with the wonderful name of Ignacio Lazigabastor, I know he's wonderful people, and he studies pigs. So when he heard that I found this, he posed next to it. Someday we're going to make a calendar out of Ignacio. To give you an idea what excavating is like when this stuff isn't just sitting at the surface, this is actually an elephant vertebra that we found just a little bit sticking out. This is Ellis Locke, yet another of Kay Reed's students from ASU. And here he is excavating the vertebra. And here it is completely cleaned up, ready to go. And both of those pictures are time stamped, and there's a whopping 2 minutes difference between them. So it took him 2 whole minutes to get that bone completely uncovered and ready to go. That's what working in this part of East Africa is like. And he looks very pleased with himself. So a typical day would be going out to places like this. There's the Urumahal tuff, so we know that's 2.8 million years. Everything above it is younger, everything below it is lower. So any fossils you find, you can control stratigraphically, and then it's just wandering up and down looking for fossils, and that's what we do. And then every time you find a fossil, you see these little blue flags. Every time you find a fossil, you put a flag next to it. And you end up with a hillside looking like that. Again, giving you an idea of how rich. Now you're probably wondering what's the difference between the blue flags and the white flags. The difference is we ran out of blue flags. Nevertheless, that's what we're doing. We're going through looking for all the fossils and then collecting them. We don't collect every single fragment, we just collect the diagnostic fossils, but everything we do collect gets recorded on these little GPS units. So every single fossil they have back at the museum for Lady Geraru has its own field number. We actually give them barcodes in the field. We have stacks of barcodes. We put the fossil in the bag, we put the barcode in the bag. This actually has a laser on one end, like a scanner from the supermarket. You go bloop to scan it, and then you type in what it is. And And so everything gets recorded, and you don't pick up the fossil until you're at that stage. So amazing wealth of data from this site. That's what the paleontology team is doing. At the same time, the paleoanthropology team is still out there. This is Brian Vilmore. He is the lead paleoanthropologist. He's based right now in the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, but he's in charge of the paleoanthropology contingents. I actually went to school at UCLA to do paleoanthropology, and after this trip, I'm glad I got into paleontology, because this is what they did day after day, week after week, is go back to Hom Hill, sit at the top of it, and screen, dry screen, to look for more fragments and see if they can find any more of that hominid. Does that look like fun? Would you rather hike around the desert and find new stuff, or would you rather stand at the top of a hill in the Africa heat and screen for things? I'll take the wandering around prospecting any day. However, this turned out to be successful, because on one of the days, this is Brian and this is Bill Kimball, the other lead paleoanthropologist on the project, and they found that fragment of tooth. This is a cast of the hominin jaw that they brought with them. The actual jaw was back at the museum where it's being kept safe. This is a cast that they had in the field, and this fragment of tooth was revealed by dry screening, and it's actually a missing chunk of the tooth. So if you were to look at the picture in Science when it was published, which was March 2015, you wouldn't know it, because that piece of the tooth wasn't in the original picture. It was published in March of 2015. We're doing the field work in February of 2015. And so I'm watching all these scientists sitting in their tents with their laptops trying to upload pictures of the new find along with the original jaw so that the science paper is actually as up to date as possible. So for those of you who read the paper, for those of you who saw the picture, I hope you now better appreciate just how much effort went into it. They actually had to fly Kay Reed back to Addis Ababa in order to glue the thing in place, reshoot the pictures, get them all to Science, and do all of that. So it was an awful lot of work. But that's why they're back there screening. That's why they are looking for things, to make sure they get as much of this hominin as they can. While they're doing that, here's Team Paleontology at the bottom of Hom Hill, all of us crawling around looking for fossils. And that's Josh, and he's found what he thinks is a hominin tooth at the bottom of the hill. That's Bill Kimball, one of the two lead paleoanthropologists, looking at it, and yeah, hominin number 2 from Hom Hill. So absolutely, there they are comparing it. Here's the cast of the lower jaw. This is this tooth right here from the same side, so it's not the same individual. It's not another tooth from that same one. There's now a second hominin known from Hominin Hill, which is pretty cool, right? So who knows what else might be out there? I don't have pictures, but later on in a totally different locality, Ellis Locke, the young gentleman I showed you, also found hominin teeth. So there are more hominins to be found out there. Presumably, hopefully, more grant dollars to be obtained. While the hominin people are doing all that, here's what we would do. You'd go out every morning, you'd have a very nice breakfast, go out every morning, collect fossils, you come back in during the heat of the day. So from noon or 1 through the rest of the afternoon, you lay out all of your finds, you organize them, you catalog them, you figure out what they are. So this is one day's haul. Yeah, it's a lot of fossils, and everything gets washed off because it's kind of dusty. It gets glued together where it's broken. It gets identified to the best of our ability. Meanwhile, Josh is downloading all of these units so that all of the data is preserved. It's backed up on a computer, and then it is uploaded to the cloud so that it's available to the folks back at the museum. So it's really, really a well-oiled machine. We do some prep work. This is actually a fossil jackal skull that Ignacio was preparing there. That is a rib from a fossil wildebeest. This is Irene, and she actually found a complete fossil skeleton of a wildebeest. The skull was a little bit away, but the skull was there, the vertebrae, the ribs, the limb bones, all of it was there. And so that's now back at the museum, but she just could not keep away from working on it. So that rib was broken, and that's what we're fixing it. And Kay Reed is, of course, supervising all of this and keeping an eye on it and making sure, because these are her students. So she wants to make make sure that they are doing the best job possible. I will definitely state these are some of the most professional people I've ever worked with, these students. So it's an amazing team of people to work with. There's only one weak spot on the team, and that was this guy. But that's a horse. And you're probably wondering, when I was getting into the horses, I kind of led with horses in the title. You probably expected this to be mostly about horses, but really, who cares about horses? How many of you care about horses? Yeah, put your hands down. But this is 2.8 million years ago, so it's a different sort of horse from what you might be used to. Certainly different than the kinds of horses that you have here in Rancho La Brea or even throughout much of Southern California. These are horses known as Hipparianine horses because they belong to the tribe Hipparianini. If you were to look at living horses today, these are equine horses. The genus name is Equus, and they belong to the tribe Equini, so they're actually quite different lineages. In fact, if you look at the horse family tree going back more than 55 million years, usually when I talk about horses or other people talk about horses, they talk about horses somewhere in that column because that column is more or less what led to living horses. And yet, look at this over here. Look at that huge profusion of other horses, including the Hipparianine horses that have nothing to do with Equus. Didn't lead to living horses, went extinct about 2 million years ago or so, and yet look how wildly successful they are. From more than 20 million years ago, almost 25 million years ago, up to around 2 million years ago, moving from the New World to the Old World, they were amazingly successful, amazingly diverse, and most people don't even hear about them today because they aren't ancestral to anything alive today. And yet they were wonderful. And like most horses, they got their start here in North America. So back 16 to 12 million years ago, here are some of the earliest sites that we know of. It appears to be in the central part of the United States. You notice here we are over here in Southern California, there's nothing. And it's not just because we haven't found it. One of the richest sites that you may have heard of anywhere from the Miocene is out in Barstow Fossil Beds. How many of you have been there?
Many times.
This is a Southern California Paleontological Society, and only 4 of you raise your hands. You organize a field trip like tomorrow. This is the type locality for a time period called the Barstowian. It is one of the richest Miocene localities anywhere on the planet. There are tens of thousands of fossils known from the Barstow fossil beds. Horses are among the most common fossils from the Barstow fossil beds. And even if you don't want to find fossils, it's just pretty to look at. It's beautiful out there, so you should go.
Can you just get in there? I'm sorry, I'm raising my hand.
Yeah, I'm going to have to start over. Hi, my name is Aaron. No. Go ahead.
Do you need, can you just get in there?
You can just drive through, they call it the Rainbow Basin Loop. And you can just drive in, there are places where you can pull over and take pictures.
Rainbow Basin,
It's Bureau of Land Management land, so if you find any fossils you absolutely cannot collect them, you need something to collect them. If you go as a big group and plan a party, at that point the BLM would say, hey, you should probably fill out a special use permit that's going to cost you a fair amount of money. But if you just drive out there, park, arm away, drive away. In fact, at some point when it's not summer in the Mojave Desert, maybe towards November, December, January, if you all want to go out there, maybe I could meet you and we can do some arm waiting. So just putting that out there as a thought. It's also gorgeous.
Owl Canyon.
I'm sorry?
Owl
Canyon is the campground. If you want to use the campground, you'd have to stay, you'd have to pay money.
We've been there.
See? Oh, so you have been there. Okay.
Did it as a group.
You should all do it. It's really gorgeous.
Yeah,
but
camel tracks
despite
there.
having tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of fossils known from this site, despite horses being one of the most common animals from the site, no Hipparianine horses whatsoever. Not alone. So it's a pretty good indication that those organisms evolved in the middle of the continent and had not made it to California by the time the horse was being deposited. You get a little younger, and now Hipparianine horses are all over. Look at the number of sites, including right here in Southern California. Here's another site that hopefully you've been to, or at least seen as you drive past it. This is Red Rock Canyon State Park.
Yeah.
How many of you have been there? How many
Heard
of you
about
knew
it.
this separate side lineage of horses was preserved there? Yeah, I didn't think so.
No.
Because nobody talks about those horses. But these wonderful exposures have also yielded Hipparianine horses, and so you can track their evolution and dispersal in North America as well. And then they get even more widely distributed as we move into the later part of the Miocene. But it's through this period as well that these animals leave North America and spread out through the rest of the world, except for some of the island continents like Antarctica and Australia. But they get most other places. So this is a Hipparianine horse called Eurygnathohippus. This is a skull from the Afar region, though this is actually in the museum in Italy. Here's one. This is actually the type of the species Afarensis from a museum in the Natural History Museum in Paris, France. Here's a lower jaw on display at the museum in Addis Ababa. Here's the actual name. I love this name, Eurygnathohippus afarensis. That just rolls off the tongue, doesn't it? And it's just a wonderful animal. So this is a very horse-like horse. Look at this jaw. And realize that Hipparianine horses got into Africa about 10 million years ago. This thing is 2.8 million years, and yet it still looks very horsey. Horses tend to seemingly evolve very slowly. It's retaining some primitive characters. It does have 3 toes on each foot, whereas Equus by this point in time has only 1 toe on each foot. There's no Equus in Africa at this point. The earliest Equus shows up at around 2.3 million years, so this predates that, and yet it's relatively common. How common is something we still need to work out. But just as an example, at Lady Guerrero, we would divvy things up by family. If I'm going too long, I apologize. But we divvy things up. So here are the bovids, and here are the hippos we left out. Here are the horses, and here are the carnivorous. And so you get a whole bag of bovids and another bag of horses. And the bovids have different families, different tribes, and all of them would break out in different bags that would all go in one big bag. And the horses were actually almost equal. So horses are very well represented in this assemblage. And yet these things disappear once Equus shows up. And that's still an open question of why that happened. This is what the fossils look like when you find them at Lady Guerrero. That is a horse tooth. This is what it looks like. You can see there's 2 pieces there, right? So then you pick them up, put them together, it's all one tooth. And you know it is a Hipparianine horse because of this feature here, which is called the protocone. And if you're looking at a Hipparianine horse like this one, here's the protocone here. And the protocone is separate from all of these other enamel folds. This stuff here is enamel. This stuff here between it is dentin, the same stuff you have on the inside of your tooth. In your teeth, they're not supposed to wear down. You kids brush your teeth so that your teeth never ever look like this. Right? But in horses, it's normal that the cusps of the teeth wear away very quickly. So then you always, this stuff wears faster than this stuff, so you'll always have a raised ridge of enamel, which is very helpful for grinding up very tough abrasive water. But you see that there's no enamel connection between the protocone and the rest of the enamel lines. So this is the Hipparianine condition. It's a primitive condition. If you're looking at an equine horse like Equus, there's the protocone again, and here you see that there are connections where the protocone connects there and connects there. This is the equine condition. Are you impressed?
No.
So which one is this?
It's
There's the protocone.
It's an Equus.
It's an Equus. It's got that connection right there. So it's equine. You see how much you've learned? And this one, there's your protocone. Not actually touching. So yeah, Hipparian. You see?
Hipparian.
See how easy horses are? This is why nobody cares about them, because anybody can do them. This is Ahmed. He was one of the Afar working with us, and he was marvelous at finding fossils. He was just great. Now the Afar, the hard R that we have in our language doesn't really show up in the Afar language. So sometimes you wouldn't quite hear things. So when he would find fossils that he knew I'd be interested, he'd say Eddic, Haas, and he'd have that big grin on his face. Because he just, I would go ape.
Eddic Haas.
He knew I would come running across the desert to find horses. Like these teeth. These are lower teeth from a Hipparianine horse. And he found them scattered on a hillside. I picked them up and put them together. They're all from the same individual. And I know that they're Hipparianine. These are lower teeth now because of that little circle of enamel there. That's called an ectostyle. And Equus doesn't have that. That's an Equus tooth actually from Las Vegas, Nevada. And they don't have that feature. So again, you can tell these features at a glance and figure out whether you're looking at an equine horse or whether you're looking at a Hipparianine horse. Ahmed worked with us. We had other AFAR working with us, but they were working with us more like this, where they would find a high vantage point, just keep an eye on the horizon with their rifles in hand, just making sure there's no trouble, no rival group showing up, no other AFAR trying to chase us off, which did happen a couple of times where people showed up with rifles and said, we don't want you here, even though we had clearance, even though we had permission from the tribal council, and AFAR like this with us all the time. And then you had some AFAR helping out in the camp, as I said, and you can see that this guy is traditionally dressed, where he has the traditional AFAR knife called the Hele knife and the traditional AFAR cell phone. And that kind of threw me for a loop, because here I am in Africa in the middle of nowhere, and all of the AFAR have better phones than mine. I still had a flip phone at this point in time, but they've all got cell phones, and one of them had his ringtone set to seagulls at the beach. So you'd be sitting there, you know, in 100-degree temperatures, and suddenly you'd hear seagulls. Getting back to the fossils, this is actually Irene, the young lady who found the wildebeest. She also found this. This is a metacarpal of Bernardino, and she found it in multiple sections, and because she's very good at this, she collected all of the sections, and so we were able to glue it together. And when you find things like this, even more than the teeth, you can actually take measurements off it. You can plot it against other fossils. So, for example, here you have a sequence of metacarpals of Uranithropus, different species from different time periods. So Amba West at 5.2 million, Aramis here getting a little bigger, from 4.4 to 4.2 million, and here's Hadar from 3.4 to 3.0 million. All of them plotting large except the very youngest one at Hadar here, which plotted small. And so it's been published as suggesting that, well, maybe since this is the very youngest one, and maybe this is from a period of time when things are starting to really dry out in Africa, maybe that small size is an adaptation. Maybe these animals are getting smaller. And so what you'd expect to see from Lady Gararu, which is even younger, is a continuation of that trend. You would expect to see a small species. Would you like to see where it plots? Right there. So it matches the predictions. It matches them quite accurately. Which makes sense, because again, this is before zebras come into East Africa. We haven't seen zebras yet. We were hoping it would be so cool to find the earliest zebra in East Africa. But we didn't. What we found was Hipparione horses, but they do seem to be responding to regional changes as you move from more tropical forests from tens of millions of years ago to the much drier end of the Miocene, because this part of East Africa is being pulled apart by the three plates, and so you have tectonics opening it up, changing the weather patterns, drying things out, and that's coupled with global changes in global climate as you have this general cooling trend. Yes, I know that we have global warming today. Yes, I know that it's particularly warm. I believe scientists estimate that we are now warmer than we have been at any point in the past 800,000 years, which is actually pretty darn warm. But it was warmer if we go back several tens of millions of years. And through time, overall, on a big geologic time scale, we're actually cooling. Right now, we're in an interglacial, given enough millennia, and we will start to move slowly back into a glacial period, and that will continue. So you have this wonderful picture where you have more and more animals that are arid adapted, smaller, better able to get by on tougher forage, less water, and the Hipparione horses seem to be fitting into that. Except, of course, and early hominins are evolving as a result of that. As Africa opens up, as it becomes drier, these bipedal hominins move out into the open, they do more walking and so on. That's been the argument. However, there are more horse fossils, like that second phalanx and that first phalanx, and they plot here among the larger ones. This is from the same time period. I can't do a lot with so few fossils, but I can say that it looks like we might be a little premature. This could be a very large individual of a smaller one, or it could be a small individual or a medium-sized. I don't know yet. What if there are two species and we just haven't found that out yet because there are so few fossils? We don't know. But it's a little premature to start saying, you know, here's the pattern and it fits perfectly. It might not. So the idea now is to go back to the field and collect more, but also do a thorough workup of the fossils at the museum. All of the horse fossils, both from Lady Gararu and from Hadar. And as it happens, this time next weekend, I will be on a plane for Addis Ababa to spend 2.5 weeks at the museum, courtesy of the Institute of Human Origins, going through all of their horses. And I'm expected to do that in 2.5 weeks. I really hope. I'm going to be motoring the whole time, but so I won't be here next week. Sorry. Hopefully your air conditioning is working by then. So that's the secret of Lady Gararu, the earliest known Homo, and some really cool horses that still have some questions that we need to answer. Now I do want to say as an aside that this is Lady Gararu, but for those of you who've been out in the field, this might be just about anywhere where you'd expect to find fossils. Those outcrops look pretty consistent. Where you find badlands that have fossils in them, you can find this in the Mojave Desert, you can find this in the Sonoran Desert, you can find it down in Borrego, even out near Las Vegas, out in Joshua Tree, you can find outcrops that look kind of like that. Well, when you start seeing things like this, you realize you're in Africa. It kind of threw me. I'd be sitting there in Africa, looking down and forgetting that I was in Africa. So, yeah, another day I'm looking for fossils. But you start seeing things like this with those acacia trees and camels wandering through, and it really does become apparent that this is a pretty special and pretty different place. This was an area where the geologists were trying to map everything in and figure out the age. Camels all over the place. These are not native, these are domestic camels. So once you start seeing the camels, you know what's going to come next is the camel herders, who again came out to talk with our FR and make sure that it was okay for everybody. There's his Helane knife. I assume he's got a cell phone in the back. I was ignoring all of this other than taking the occasional picture because I was finding fossils like this one. Anybody want to guess? Hippo. That is another hippo bone. And that's what I'm finding. And I'm not terribly impressed with what I'm finding. And then I found this. Go ahead, Nola, hit us. No, not a hippo. And because it's so white, I almost kicked it because I thought it was just a modern bone just lying there. But then, and Nola, if you talk to Shelley anytime soon, you make sure you walk her through this. Because that right there is the tooth. So I know I've got a jaw. That right there is the bottom of the jaw. And that right there is the front end of the jaw. So when you have a big tooth like a carnassial, like a shearing tooth, and then you have a downturned front end of the jaw, I can only think of one carnivore. It's got a carnassial, a shearing tooth, so you know it's carnivore. And I can think of only one, Nola, go with me here, who has a big front end of the lower jaw.
Yeah.
Thank you. Saber-toothed cats. Dire wolves wouldn't have them, lions wouldn't have them, hyenas wouldn't have them, saber-toothed cats have them. So I'm looking at that thing in the ground and I found a saber-toothed cat, and I was very pleased with myself. And this being the 21st century, I decided to do what all the kids do, and post for a selfie. So that's me with my phone. Unfortunately, I was by myself, so nobody's noticing me. Took it back to the camp, immersed it in water, and it promptly fell apart because it was being held together with dirt, but I managed to glue it back together. This is what it looks like. So there's the carnassial I was talking about. Here's the teeth in the front. There's that big chin, which on the other side would be where you'd have room for the canine tooth. And this is a more globally distributed kind of saber-toothed cat known as Hominins. And so it's common, according to a paleontologist who studies these cats, a gentleman named Lars Bergelind. He says he's already looked at the jaw, he's already measured it, and based on all of his work, this is the largest Hominins discovered. So its size doesn't make a big difference, but it's kind of a cool factoid that I found a really big Hominins. When I showed it to Kay Reed, she said, "Holy crap," except crap was not the word she used. So, there we are with Homotherium and Hipparianine horses outside of Hadar. And by the time you get to this point in the talk, you have to understand that this entire presentation has been brought to you by the letter H. One more H, though, would be either hairy or happy. I can give you one or the other. This is a picture I took on the last day before I flew back and had to shave all of it off. My wife said, "Absolutely no way you're coming with that." But it was marvelous. We were out there for a solid month, just collecting fossils, living in a tent, and it was just amazing. We'll go back in a heartbeat. But also contributing, all of the fossils we find are helping to link who we are with who Lucy was. And so this work is still going on. There's another team being fielded this coming January or February, and as I said, I'm going to the museum next weekend. I'll be there for 2.5 weeks or so. At the same time, there will be an expert on crocodiles from the University of Iowa, a gentleman named Chris Brochu, who will also be going there. And a gentleman from ASU named John Rowan, and yes, in fact, Ignacio Lazagabaster will also be there studying the pigs. So it's just going to be marvelous. And so give us a few years and you're going to hopefully see a lot of cool science coming out of it about the animals themselves. And with that, thank you very much for had 3 toes on each foot. I can't, maybe that makes a difference. Is that really it? I don't know. So I want to look at all of the bones. I want to look at everything I can to think about it. There's little things, like right now with horses, they have, for those of you, this could bore some of you, but if you watch a horse standing in the field, what does it do? It just stands there. Horses can fall asleep just standing there. Do not try that at home. Don't just stand there. I'm going to take a nap now, Mom. Don't do that. But horses can't because they have ligaments and tendons that block their limbs in place. And we can actually see that showing up in the fossil record. And in the back limbs, we see it as far back as 10 million years. In the front limbs, we don't see it until about 4 million years, which is cool. But remember, Hipparian horses got to Africa 10 or 11 million years ago. So do they show any of that in their front limbs? Because that's, what, 8 million years separate from Equus. So do they show it at Lady Gerard? Do they show it at Hadar? I don't know. Would that be the kind of difference where one of them can rest a little more? But I'm very much at the front end of just getting started, what are the differences? But that's one that nobody bothered to look at because nobody cares about horses. They're not the hominins. The young gentlemen, yes.